Hi, and welcome back to Plastic Models by a Regular Dude and part 3 of Plastic Models for Beginners, Back to Basics with the Grumman F4F Wildcat. If you'll remember, the objective with this kit is to do just a basic out-of-the-box build and just do the basic unweathered paint job. So let's take a look at where we are and where we're headed. Alright, so we've got the cockpit is assembled, so up through step 2 is complete. So in step 3, we need to do the firewall portion of it. And if you'll remember where I left off last time, I had painted this green, so it was ready to go. And then I was going to paint this side. Okay, and the color for that side is XF2, which is Tamiya white, flat white. So that's what I'll be doing. But before I paint it, since all of these parts are XF2, I'm going to go ahead and assemble these parts first to the firewall. So it'll be easier to paint, less chance of anything coming loose due to contaminated joints. So let's see, the parts we need are B10 and B16. Which here is B10 right here, and B16 right here. Gotta be real careful with parts like that because they're really super thin and very fine. So let's get this cut off of here. Get these cut off as closely as possible. That one was a little bit close in there, so I'm going to have to use the knife very carefully so I don't mess anything up and I don't chop my finger. And then I'll just use my sanding stick here since it fits in there just right. Get that sanded off. And then get this piece here cleaned up as well. Okay, so those parts right there are going to be completely enclosed. So this is a case where, you know, it's up to you what you want to do. In this case, I am not going to spend a whole lot of time cleaning up seam lines, mold parting lines, that kind of thing, just because these parts are so fragile and fine. And they're not going to be seen at all. Using coarser sanding stick there and making a lot of racket. It's not as crucial to have these parts totally cleaned up. Now, if you want to do it, and I often do, just for, you know, the exercise to make sure I'm keeping my technique going. But in today's case, I'm just going to get the majority of the remaining bits of sprue off of there to glue it in place. So what we have here is this part here. You need to watch the orientation. it comes down and bends in. So this will go on here like this. And then this part here fits like that. Whoops. So these two little pegs fit around the edge of that one. So I think what I'll do first, just keep sliding around and stuff. I'm going to go ahead and, that's a pretty positive connection there. So I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and glue this part so it'll kind of stay in place. So I'm not having to do the needing 3 hands thing. Whoops. Let it set up for a second. Then I can put this in place. It goes there and there. So the best course of action is to let gravity hold it in place like that. Whoops. Put some cement in there. Using the end of my tweezers, make sure that's bottomed out really good. And then I'll dab of cement there and there to hold that in position. And there it is. So I'm going to let that dry for a minute or two, and then we can paint it. Okay, so in this case, since I'm using very little paint, what I'm going to be doing, I've already mixed my paint up, and I'm going to mix it right in my color cup. Now, a lot of people freak out at that, but there's a method to my madness, and I'll show you how I make it work. Now, for bigger batches of paint, I wouldn't do this, but in this case, I don't want to have to dirty up a container or anything. So what I do is I'll drop 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's go 7 drops of thinner. And I do that first. So that's furthest down in the color cup. That way when I put the paint in, it's kind of suspended in the thinner. And I'm going to do the same amount. Actually, I'm going to do 6 drops of paint. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because it's not going to take much at all. And the reason I do that is the paint will be suspended in the thinner. Leastwise, this is my my reasoning. I mean, it's going to dissolve, obviously, but that way I'm not putting the color in first where the thickest paint is down in, furthest down in there, and potentially clogging. I doubt it would happen, but you'd have a big clump of paint coming out more likely. This way, when I first spray it, if anything, it'll be just a little bit of thinner and then the paint, thinner mixture. And then just using my cheap brush, I mix it up, really well in the cup, and get a nice little mix of paint going on here. Now, again, there's some people that would just cringe at that, but so far so good. I haven't had any problems with it, and it works. So then what I do is now hopefully this paint will be thick. You know, as a matter of fact, it's looking a little tiny bit thin. So I'm going to go ahead and put just a little tiny bit more paint in there. just so I don't have to worry about putting a whole bunch of layers on, because white's kind of a that should be good. White's kind of a tough one because it doesn't cover as opaquely when thin as other colors, and I don't want to have to shoot a bunch and mix up another batch. Now again, this is what I do, so whatever method works for you or whatever method you develop, stick with it if it works. Alright, so that's a little bit thicker. Generally I like my paint really thin, but with white sometimes you just gotta, I like to go a little bit thicker. Okay, so there we got that. So let's take my gator clip paint stick. I'll clip it right on the back like that. And start painting. Now again, I normally prime, but in this case I'm not, because of where these parts are. I mean, this really is, with the exception of right down in here, not really all that necessary because you're not going to see it once this thing's buttoned up. Okay. So I'm going to let that cure up just for a second. Then I'll do another layer. Alright, so let's spray a little bit more on here. Alright, so I think that's pretty good. Whoa, I think that's pretty good right there. So, just like last time, I'm going to clean it the same way. And I'm not going to do it on camera because you've already seen it once. And we need to move along. So, hang tight while I clean out the airbrush. Alright, so the white is done. So now, this part here is these chains. They need to be painted, so I'm going to use some Vallejo steel color. If you don't have any steel color or whatever, you could use black and then just dry brush a little silver over it to make it look metallic. As a matter of fact, maybe I'll demonstrate that. So what I'll do is I'll do one side the steel, like this, and then I'll show you how to do it with black and silver dry brushing. And again, this is not going to be seen, but I'm going to do it anyway. Just so we can see what it looks like. This brush here is a 5.0 in that cheap brush set that I bought, and it's been a really good brush. Okay, do the inside part of the links. get the outside part of the links here. Inside. Okay, so there's that one. So clean that off. And then using some of my NATO black. I'm using NATO black. It's just a little bit more gray than when it dries than just pure black. So, you know, it doesn't really matter that much. So let's do, since this one's easier to get to, we'll do this one. Now we'll do them both. Trying to keep in frame here. And if you could put in the comments below if you like this camera angle better than the one I was using before that was more over this way, let me know, because it just seems like this is easier because I'm not banging my head on the camera. I'm not getting my remaining hair follicles in frame. So I'm just thinking it works a little bit better for both me and the viewer, so you don't have to look at my noggin when you'd rather be, hopefully, you'd rather see me paint stuff. Okay, and then we'll do the other one here. Like this. That's what I like about these Vallejo Model Air colors. They're designed for airbrush use. But boy, do they brush good, especially on detail stuff. You don't have to worry about. Doesn't seem to thicken up as quickly as the model color does after thinning. Okay, so we got those. Get this outside part right here. Try not to make this too boring because this is some tedious and boring kind of stuff, but I want to demonstrate as much as possible for those that may not be too familiar with doing this kind of stuff. All right, so there's that. So let me clean that off. And then using a little bit bigger brush, I'll get just my regular silver. Silver Model Air. Hear that clacking around in there? That's a stainless steel nut to help keep it mixed up. This ain't going to take much at all there. So what you do is you get just a very little bit of paint and you rub most of it off, and then you just dry brush it on there. Dry brushing just meaning that you don't have much on there at all, and you're just kind of scraping some of the remaining pigment over the black to give it kind of a metal sheen. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. Looks pretty decent. But again, I'd be a lot more careful if this was going to be exposed, but since it's not, I just wanted to demonstrate that real quick. All right, so that is all put together and ready to go. All right, so now ready to glue that part onto the cockpit floor. And this is the way it fits, like that. Now there's a little bit of wiggle room there, so you want to make sure these are, you know, pretty vertical and straight. So before we glue those on, the points where the mating surfaces, I want to make sure those are cleaned off as much as possible. Okay, whoops. I don't want to glue it in upside down. That would be a tragedy. So I'm going to hold this, and then I'm going to scrape that. Made myself a little line, that way I can scrape some of that paint off where the two surfaces mate. Again, is it absolutely necessary? No. The Tamiya Extra Thin is solvent enough that it would eat through the paint. I just like to keep it as clean as possible. Okay, so let's put it back together like that, and then cement that into place. Like that. And before it sets up completely, we'll do a quick test fit and see how it fits into the fuselage. The fuselage. Looks like it fits in there pretty good. That's lined up pretty well back there. That's lined up there. Yep. So that looks pretty good. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to put that back in place right there. Make sure this part here needs to bottom out on the ridge on the inside. So first thing I'm going to do here is scrape a little bit of the paint there, and sorry, bumped it. That's what I didn't want to do. And there, back here it's already okay. And then scrape some of this paint off here. Whoops. The contact points for the inside of the fuselage. Sure it's lined up. Okay, so what I'm going to do first, whoops, see, you got to make sure you keep that stuff lined up. Boy, I'm having a hideous time And this, there we go. Whoop, I had to blame it. There we go. Okay, I think what I'm going to do in this case is I am going to use this cement here for this part and this part. So what I'll do is I'll put a bead of it along here. I think this would be about the equivalent of the Revell Contacta, I think it's called. That is, seems to be really common in the European countries. I don't even know if it's available in the US, but I think it's really similar. Okay. There we go. All right, so that's in place. So I'm going to hold that for a minute and let it set up just a little bit. All right, so now I'm going to take. Now here's a little trick. If you think your brush in your Tamiya cement isn't long enough, you can take an old brush, which I have one right here, and use that since it's long and you don't have that handle in the way. So that's just a little tip for you. But in this case, it's not necessary. So we'll get some of this around the edges. Like that. And make sure it is bottomed out on that ridge on the inside, because you want it to, the bottom needs to be lined up. Okay, so I'm going to hold this for a minute. All right, so there's that. So that can now be set aside to cure up. All right, so that completes step 3. So the next part is step 4, obviously, and that is doing the lower wing and the upper wing sections. So XF2, which is white, is what's going to be sprayed on the inside of that. Okay, as well as this intercooler part that goes here. So we're going to go ahead and glue that in place. And that looks like all that we need. So let's cut the wing parts off. Upper and lower. And then the intercooler, which is part number 6. Oh, B9. I was looking at that upside down. Okay, so there's those parts. So again, we want to get those cleaned up. I'm not sure how much of this is going to show, so I'm going to clean up these. Molding mold part lines here, just in case it's visible too much. simply by scraping it. Could also sand it. I like to scrape it because the blade's nice and flat and it works good on a flat surface. So I'm going to do that all the way around this part. Okay, I got the intercooler cleaned up. So this is how I take care of the wings. So as you can see, this is right on the edge of this leading edge of the wing. So what I like to do is, so I don't mar the edge, I like to cut it at an angle, slowly, till it gets most of it off. These are some really big sprue gates. See, there it did it right there. So I'm gonna have to putty that up. That's the danger. But you know what? I can show you how to fix that. It happens. Okay, and then I just, for like that one right there, I'll lightly hit it. I don't want to hit it too much because I don't want to create a divot in the leading edge of the wing. So I'm just going to hit it enough because I'm going to sand it some more once I get the, again, I'm trying to be careful. Now this is kind of cool. I'm sure it was by design, but there's rivet detail right here. And they put, Tamiya put those between the rivet detail. So there's less likelihood of obliterating the detail of the rivets. So that's kind of cool. That's one of the things I like about Tamiya stuff. Now that's most of it. So the rest of it I'm going to do after I get the wing halves put together. Okay. So let's see how this one works. Okay, that's a little bit better. I'm going to cut it this way this time, like that. Now see, that probably should have been the way I handled that other one. But, you know, stuff happens and it's going to need some work anyway. So we can do that once we get the wing halves, the upper and lower sections put together. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Oh yeah, see, that's really good. That's the way I should have handled it. But I'm kind of glad I did it. That way I can show you what not to do, and then show you how to fix it, and show you the correct way to do it on this side. Alright, so those are cleaned up. And then we need to do the same thing here. Nice and clean there. Again, I'm going to do it like this. And you got to be careful because you don't want to cut any of the leading edge off. You want just that little part to come off. See, that worked good. I'm stoked with that. Yep, that's the way to do it. Now, it might not necessarily work with all types of sprue cutters. If I were to be using this one here, it might not cut it as cleanly. Let's take a look. It might be fine. Yeah, not quite as good, but again, it's nice and flat for the most part, and there's less to have to clean up. But I'm going to go ahead and use this, cut it the rest of the way off. Yeah. Okay, and then the last one, I have to do that one like this. All right. So let me clean this up a little bit more and then I'll come back. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to test fit these upper wing portions onto the lower. So it's got locating pins here and here and here. So just line those up, put it in place, and make sure when you squeeze it together as if you were clamping it, it's nice and closed all the way around. Yeah, see the trailing edges? They look really good. Sometimes they'll be splayed out a little bit and they need work, but that looks good. So that side's good. And then let's take a look at this side, which I don't expect would be any different. Okay, nice all the way around. Wingtips and the trailing edges. So that all looks really good. So what I want to do now before I paint this is I want to kind of test fit this and see how well it goes together. So this has a recessed edge there. This has a raised edge, so that goes together like that. And let's see. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, there is a seam right here, and it looks like it might be a natural seam line on the real aircraft. So, let's take a look and see. Okay, so that seam line is right there. So that is another one of the things that's nice about Tamiya kits, is generally when they have two parts going together, there's a natural seam line, if at all possible, and there's one right there. So because of that, let me get all this stuff out of the way, we don't have to worry about filling that seam. Okay, that seam is supposed to be there, so when it's put together, it'll still be there, but it'll look just like part of the natural seams of the aircraft. So then we need to look back here at this, and that also lines up on a natural seam line, and it lines up really well. So that's a really good thing. So next, let's put this wing portion back on, and look at that. That is going to be stellar. There is no, I mean, there's a natural seam line there that's supposed to be there, so there won't have to be any filling. You're not going to have to worry about losing any of that rivet detail that's along the edge of the wing. And I forgot to clean this part off right here. Just like that. So that is really going to look good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the inside of this. First, I'll glue the intercooler in place, which goes in that peg right there. And then it looks like that hose part fits right in that channel right there. So put a little bit of cement there, some there, and we'll let that dry up. And then we'll get cracking and paint it. All right, so I was going to paint the inside of this, but in looking at all of this, I really don't have to spray the whole inside. I only need to spray inside of here. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then we can move on to assembling this part. All right, now with the inside portion painted white that needs to be painted, a couple things. First, I need to paint this radiator part, or oil cooler, whatever it is. Yeah, oil cooler, since it's a radial engine. Or intercooler, I should say. I need to paint that silver, and for that I'm just using some dull aluminum. Vallejo dull aluminum. And I'm not going to be too super careful about it because it's going to be up inside or you're not going to see it. I'll get it painted up. Now, what I did when I was painting this white, so I also made sure I got on this inside edge here because that's part of the landing gear base, so I want to make sure that's white as well. Then, a quick note on the construction of the parts I put in last time in the fuselage. So, this part right here, whenever I did the test fitting, I noticed that when everything was snapped into place, that there was a pretty, now see there's a little bit of a gap there now, but before I did what I'm about to show you, there was a really noticeable gap right there. Now there should be somewhat of a gap because it's not, you know, a piece that's like welded or attached to this here, but it was a little more than I wanted. So what I did in order to make it look right is I got my Tamiya extra thin, and this is a trick. Sometimes when you glue stuff, especially if it hasn't set for too long, after I monkeyed around with it a little bit, it probably dried for, you know, 5-10 minutes. What I did is I got the Tamiya extra thin and I ran it along this seam right inside here and let it sit for a second, and then I took a little small screwdriver, or you can use whatever you know will fit down in there, and I pried this back away from the inner curved surface of the fuselage, so you can see there's a noticeable gap up there now. But what I did is it pulled that down so it will sit flush with the inside of this. And what I did is once I pulled it like excessively so then that way whenever I push this back into place and got it all the way it's supposed to be, it pushed that enough back into place where it would still make contact with this part of the fuselage. So that's just something you might want to take note of and consider whenever you're putting this thing together. And then I did a test fit of the upper wing portions, and everything still fits just like it did before. As you can see, it all squeezes together nicely, and everything's good. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do like I did before. I'm going to glue this part here first, and actually, I think what I might do is I think I might glue the front first, and then I'll come back to this because I want this stationary while I monkey around with this. So, just like any other glue joint, and remember, this is a natural seam line, so you don't have to worry about filling it. This here, you can sand down if you want, but the engine cowling is going to cover that up. So, the first thing I'm going to do is this part right. I think I'm going to do here and here. Now I kind of blew it at the beginning when I was showing the materials I'm going to use. I forgot to mention that I use clamps for a lot of things. So if you don't have the clamps, you can pause here, find some, or come up with some kind of solution. But I apologize for not, you know, remembering to do that. But what that does is it allows me to glue a section at a time to where it fits together really nicely. So it'll squeeze together right there. So you can also use tape. You can use masking tape. Just be careful that you don't get any cement underneath the masking tape, or it will mar the surface of the aircraft. So let me get this in place here. Okay, and then we'll test fit the wing and make sure it's still looking really good. Yeah, you're still getting a nice seamless area there. So that's ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this clamp a little bit. And these clamps, by the way, are super cheap. This one here is made by X-Acto. XL makes the exact same thing, and you can find them online or at most hobby shops and craft stores that deal with any kind of hobby type materials. All right, so we got that right there. So this is the part I'm going to do first. Just that section. Hold it right there and put the clamp on. Sorry about shaking this. I had a cup of coffee a little while ago and I probably shouldn't have. Whoops. There we go. Now it looks kind of white and weird. That's because some of that paint is dissolved. Okay. Now I think I can go ahead and do this side as well because it's all clamped together pretty nice and flat. So I'll go ahead and do the cement here as well. Just give it a good squeeze. Make sure it's all together. And it looks pretty good. All right, so we'll let that dry up for a bit. All right, so I've removed the clamp. This looks good here. This right here that you see is just cement that is seeped out from being clamped together. And we've maintained our panel line there. And I may be cleaning this up a bit, but I will determine that after I do the primer. So with that glued, now I need to glue the back. And as you can see, it fits together really well, and it's on a natural panel line. So all I need to do, I'm going to apply the cement right here. Let it seep into that joint there. And do the same on this side here. And hold that into place. Now I'm not going to actually cement this part yet. I'm going to let this set up first. Looks pretty good. And then once that sets up, then I'm going to run a bead of cement in here, and hopefully it'll fill that little bit of a gap. It's not bad, and it'd probably be fine just left alone because of the size of the panel lines up here, but I don't want it to be too deep. So let's let this set up for a minute. All right, so I've got the seam finished up there on the bottom, and it's pretty well lined up the way I want it. And all I did to fill in the gap there was a very, very slight gap. I just used some Tamiya extra thin and just put a dab in there, and it just kind of melted it together. So it's good to go. So with that, now I can cement the wing tops in place. And as you can see, it's going to fit really nicely. So the way I'm going to do that, make sure that the trailing edges look good. It's good there. Good there. So it's good all the way around. Now, one thing that's kind of wonky, and I would possibly, if I was really going to go for a gung-ho detailed job on this thing, if it wasn't a beginner kit, is these gun ports. They're hollow on the bottom, but not on the top because of the way the upper wing is molded. So that, you know, but again, this is we're doing this as a beginner kit, so it'll be fine. So anyway, let's glue this together. So what I'm going to do first is using my thicker cement, and again, you know, I could use the extra thin, but I like to do this where the pins are. Put the cement on here like that. Put this in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way around the wing like I did on the fuselage. So I'll put make sure the cement's getting all the way through there. Then I will do the same here and here. There. And there. So I'm up to this point here, so using some of my clamps, and again, I'm sorry I didn't include that in the initial materials and tools list, but I totally spaced it. So there's that. So let's go ahead and put some cement there. That's gonna, so I can go through that seam, and then here. Okay, get another clamp. So that's looking good there. So then let's move around to the back of the wing. Just put some all around to where capillary action will pull it in. Like that. So I'll put another clamp there. And one there. And then that, I would need one on the end. In this case, it's flat enough we can use this like that. So we'll let that dry. All right, so the wings are all glued, and so now the next step is going to be to go around the edges, the wing edges where the seam is. There's a little bit of overlap on these, and sand all the way around. To make it nice and smooth and seamless. I'm using 2 sanding sticks for this, one that's kind of a medium, and then the fine. And that looks pretty good. I already did this part here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on that, and then in this video here, so it doesn't get too long, next time we'll come back and do these parts, the remaining parts here on step 4, and then move on from there. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, anything like that, put them in the comments down below, and I will get back to those as quickly as possible. So until next time on Plastic Models by a Regular Dude in the Back to Basics video, I will see you all later.